Okay. Ah, all right. We are live, and see if, as we go, if anybody asks any questions and wants to know anything more about what we're talking about today. Um, I was I was thinking about where to go with this because when we first got on, I was wondering, well, should we go somewhere different because we've been talking about the same old stuff. We're not same old stuff, but pretty much the same thing. What's going on in the country right now for the last few weeks with the coronavirus and the racism and all of the stuff that's been going on, which is a lot that the country is dealing with and people are dealing with in uh, in our daily lives. We cannot ignore it. It's just in our face.
Right.
And in some ways, we feel worn out by it. Some people, including myself, sometimes I just like, can I have a break? Um, you know. So I was wondering whether we should, keep digging into that, some of the stuff that we need to maybe learn at what our sole purpose is here in this moment in time, because
Hmm.
there is uh, there's so much uh, that we need to learn and grow from and discover what's emerging in us to a better way of being. And there's still a lot of old junk that needs to be kind of whisked away a little bit. We need to excavate some more of that stuff to clean it out. Um, and last week you said something that really I've been thinking a lot about when we were talking about manifesting things on the outside. And you said something along the lines of it's more about what we radiate outward to get the what we see coming back to us.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, then, um, what what do we need to do to just in this day in history where there's so much going on, and how do we find what our sole purpose is in this time period in relating to all that's going on? Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
it definitely makes sense to me. The experience that we're all having right now, I love the question that you ask because I feel like I have one of those annoying questions or annoying responses that like deep gurus have. And, the true real reality is we don't need to do anything. So, one of the things that I'm becoming more and more aware of as we move through this time, and somehow one of my old posts came up. It wasn't like a memory. You never know how deep people are going into your old photo galleries or on social media, and they see something and they like it, or however they came across it. And it was the picture of the yin yang symbol.
mm,
And the image went on to say, "Bad news. Um, uh, this isn't going to last. Good news. This isn't going to last." And I think I am growing, because I'm constantly growing, into the awareness that far too often we are not able to hold the space long enough And we're so quick to jump and respond because there's a new wave, or there's a new trend, or there's a new event that we're all wrestling with on some level. And because we're wrestling with it, and because that new event or that new thing is happening, it then impacts us. And so I think for many of us, it's becoming less about what do we do and more about, you know, finding something that is a consistency that has been calling us, period. Right? It was there's probably was something that was calling us before COVID-19 stepped on the scene. There was probably something calling us before we entered into the year 2020. We may not always have been able to articulate it. We may not have always been able to express it. But the presence itself is doing the same thing it always was. It's the same yesterday, today, and forever. It's the same when there's a pandemic. It's the same when we're dealing with racism. It's the same when we're dealing with misogyny and the wiping out of indigenous cultures. And so I think that the more powerful thing for us to make an inquiry about is, what about me as a being that's constantly growing, constantly expanding, constantly evolving? What am I being called to as this season may be here? But that has nothing to do with the season. Certainly there are things that we can do. When the weather changes, certainly we put on the clothing that matches the weather. But that's the exterior. And far too often, we're dealing with the exterior circumstances. What are the inner practices and inner activities that we're being called to in the midst of everything that's going on the outside is probably a more interesting and a more fruitful endeavor to take on.
That is, I'm glad you said that, because one of the things I've been thinking about is meditation and being quiet and calming myself and staying centered amongst all of this stuff. And
Yes.
you know, this is a question that I have for you, because Reverend Michael and how he meditates and everything is so. Compared to me, it feels so serious. And how do you meditate? What is your meditation practice, and how do you get centered? Because sometimes for me, it's a bicycle ride that gets my head to clear out, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the same as sitting and. I've taken a couple of meditation classes at Agape, and there's a real sitting practice. Now I do that, but sometimes I can't ever get quiet, and then I'll go on a bike ride, and all of a sudden my mind will get quiet, and
Mm-hmm.
will come in. And so, how do you feel about all that, and what do you do to meditate and to get centered?
So I am a runner.
Mm.
So I like to go for runs. And my runs have become more and more meditative over the years. But I also have a sitting practice. I have a practice of meditating while I'm in the middle of a meeting with people. The thing about meditation, and it's one of the things that I believe Reverend Michael does an amazing job at seeking to get people to realize and awaken to, is that while in the Western culture, we talk a lot about quieting the mind and shutting it off, but those things are impossible. It is never the mind that we should give our energy to if we're seeking to quiet it. giving our energy to the mind specifically activates it, right? It gives it more kindling in the fire. And what we really are called to do is pull away from the mind. And this is one of the things that I like to break down in my teaching on a regular basis. When we're born in a mind, body, we are spirit inhabiting the body. As we evolve, the first thing that we develop is our body. There's, the fingers, the toes, learning how to walk, considering the voice part of the body. We learn how to use our vocal cords. We start developing the senses because we've been inside our mother's womb where all of our senses have been muted. So you're not as sensitive to touch when you're in water. You're not as sensitive to sound when you're in the womb. All of those things. So as a being, you're stepping out into this world and suddenly you're just inundated with all sorts of sounds, all sorts of feelings, all sorts of energies, and you don't even know how to use your body. So the first thing we develop is the use of our body. The second thing we're taught to develop is our intellect, right? And so the intellect and the mind are not the same thing. The intellect is the functioning of the processing of information, the designating between mom and dad, the use of language and words, starting to pick up information, starting to recognize the difference between our senses. And so as we develop our body, as we develop our intellect, while many families have religious practices, spiritual practices, it still takes a while before we get to that space where we recognize that we have a body, but we're not our body. Where we then recognize that we have a mind that has thoughts and information that passes through it, but we're not our mind. How do we know we're not our mind? Specifically because the mind sometimes is like leaving the television on a channel and never changing it. You don't have any control over the things that come across your mind. They initiate and originate on their own. You don't even notice them. Think about all the times you start thinking of a song and the whole lyrics of the song are already going through your head and you're like, oh yeah, I love that. Or you see something and it reminds you of something and then you go down a rabbit hole. Next thing you know, you realize that 2 or 3 minutes has passed, maybe 5 or 10. But what we don't realize is that we're not the initial thought, and sometimes we're not the initiator of thought. We can initiate thoughts. We do initiate thoughts, but that's not how the primary way our mind functions most often. Most often, the mind is doing what the mind does, even while we're studying, even while we're reading, even while we're on the phone with somebody, we're thinking about something else. That's the mind. And yet, if we close our eyes during meditation, we can feel the body and know that we're not the body. If we close our eyes, we can see the way the mind is functioning because we put our attention on it. But in our meditative practice, the intention is to pull back away from all of those things and to hold a conscious idea. And mind you, there are many different ways to meditate, many different practices, many different intentions. But for one who wants to expand in consciousness, grow in their relationship with the divine presence, grow in their relationship with God, experience peace, experience that no matter what's going on in the world, the practice cannot be focusing on the mind. The practice cannot be focusing on the body. The practice must focus on our awakened awareness that we are one with the presence. And in contemplating our oneness with the presence, to be able to observe the body and know that we're not the body, which then begins to develop a habit pattern and a life pattern that doesn't allow us to be primarily concerned with the body, right? That's the affect. The affect from having a consciousness that knows I'm not the body is I stop prioritizing how I look, how I even feel as me. I experience feelings. I know what I look like with 50 extra pounds, with 50 left pounds, and I'm not moved by that because none of that is me. As I continue to prioritize my observance of the mind and know that I'm not the mind, and then when I notice anxiety, fear, worry, doubt, when I notice the thoughts that make me afraid, when I notice those types of things come up, I'm not moved by them because I have developed a practice that is able to see my own thoughts, but know that that's not me. So then I'm able to disconnect from them to have the experience of my fear, doubt, worry, anxiety, and still be able to navigate it because I'm not those thoughts, ideas, and feelings. In my meditation practice, I am sitting and observing all that is me in the experience, but I am noticing that, and I should say that difference. I'm noticing everything that I'm experiencing and that it is not me. So I'm noticing my body, I'm noticing my thoughts, I'm noticing my feelings, I'm noticing my emotions. I'm not denying any of it, but I'm also not personalizing it as if it's the truth about me just because I have those thoughts and feelings.
So when the feelings come up, does it feel then to you, it's like a detachment from it in a way you understand?
Well,
I feel.
yes and no. So I like to differentiate between the word detached and unattached, right?
Mhm.
And it's sort of like it's a razor edge of an idea. Like, so detached to me is shutting off my connection to, right? Unattached for me is not attached to what I'm experiencing, but to be able to experience it without it being me, right? So I go in for an audition, go in for a job interview. I want the job, right? I don't get the job. I'm disappointed. Even if it's like the best, like I was super excited, I was super invested. I can be disappointed, but not get depressed, right? Because I can have the feeling like I did my best and I went in there, I wanted to do it. But I don't have to disconnect myself from feeling anything at all, right? I can feel what I feel, but when I feel what I feel, it's not me. But I can gather information. Reverend Ron Blair at Agape, often talks and uses the phrase, which I love, which is that it's all just information. The feelings that you experience, if I detach myself from the feeling, I can't get the information. It's like pulling out a cord from your computer. But if I'm able to receive the information, but not be attached to whether it's yes or no, I'm able to have a wholly different experience, right? And it doesn't make me more or less because I did or did not get something. And then it continues to shift in all the different areas and aspects of our life. And so when I'm sitting in these spaces of meditation, when I'm walking, when I'm running, whenever I'm activating and engaging my consciousness, I do not allow myself to be primarily concerned with anything that's transitory, even if I really, really want it. I'm here to have the experience of a job interview. I know the goal is to get the job, but if I focus on getting the job and not having the full experience of the job interview, I'm more primarily living in a future that has yet to be determined, that I cannot actually experience. So I'm imagining it as opposed to being fully in that moment of interview. And that disconnects me from the moment and the people that I'm with.
So someone commented, so not latching onto feelings and thoughts is sort of what you're saying by not latching onto it. Is that
Yeah, or don't let them latch on to you, because it sometimes feels like feelings and thoughts have latched on to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know in my experience, I don't call myself an empath, but I feel things very deeply at times. And So I recognize that energy of empathic resonance. And there are times where I know that I'm feeling something and it has nothing to do with me. It could be the place that I'm in. Go ahead.
You know, that was actually a question I wanted to ask you, but at some point during this, because I want to focus on the feelings that you're experiencing and being in the moment of feeling them. Is feeling them and experiencing them is something that we want to do, and then be able to uh, have control over how we respond to them.
Yeah, there you go, Jeff. So, what are the big differences between the different animals on the planet and humans? Because human beings are animals. We're classified as animals. We're the same biologically. Is, and again, this is Reverend Michael's masterful teaching, that the difference between humans and animals is not just that we have thoughts. Animals have thoughts too. If you watch any of those nature shows, you see them doing things, and it's not just some instinct. They do have high sensitivity to their instincts, but you see them planning. You see packs of wolves working together and intimidating another animal. You see these things happen, so they have thoughts. But I don't think they have that a pack of wolves, when they don't successfully get a kill, go do a debrief after, right? They are not able to have thoughts about their thoughts. However, they do learn, right? They do learn things. And so the difference between the evolution of the mind and humans and animals is that I can have a thought right now that just comes to me. And then I can think about how I feel. I can recognize, like become observant and observe how I feel and what's going on within me now that I've had the thought. And then I can think about how I feel about the fact that that thought came to my mind. And I can then have a thought again about my thought, about that feeling that came to mind. I can layer by layer pull away the different aspects of my immediate response to that thing. So one of the biggest things that many of us struggle with is that we are constantly reactive, right? Like a chemical reaction. You put these two chemicals in, there's a reaction. And many times we walk into a room, we run into somebody says something to us, somebody doesn't do something to us, somebody walks past us and doesn't acknowledge us. We have a reaction. But the difference between having that reaction and then having an awareness of our inner reaction and then not reacting, being able to take a breath, being able to recognize that there's tension and anxiety because you walked into the room and you were in the room with the boss, you guys had an intense conversation and it really didn't go the way you wanted to. So you're all the way triggered potentially by the previous moment that's not actively happening now. But if we can take a breath, notice our anxiety, we can then begin to build the building blocks, not even suddenly change it, but we begin to build the blocks that it would allow us to then separate and put a little distance between the reaction that we have and the thought, feeling, emotion, experience that we have, which then allows us to truly navigate those things. It's like the difference between feeling like you have to react to a strike of lightning and a storm that's coming, right? The storm that's coming are the emotions that are rushing in. And sometimes we treat the storm that's coming as if it's the bolt of lightning that struck, and we suddenly start reacting, and our anxiety and our fear or whatever, or our anger just starts to rise and rise and rise. And we can't take the breath like the storm that's rolling in, and breathe it in, and then to be able to be consciously choosing how we're going to show up, how we're going to respond, what is ours to do in those moments.
You know, I try to envision like a bubble around every thought and every action, in which there's a space that I call like the God space. That's the pause in between it the emotions and the stuff coming to me and my response. There's always enough space between my response that if I pay attention, I can change my response.
Absolutely.
Or
And so meditation is about your attention, right? So Reverend Michael, often when he's facilitating longer meditation sittings, he will ask the those participating in the meditation, where is your attention? So often, as you described, you're sitting down to meditate, and it's one thing to say that I have an intention to be more at peace, right? So I say, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to be more at peace. So I close my eyes, and this is the thing that maybe isn't talked about enough. When we ask for something, peace, for example, the universe's response is not to bring us peace. The universe doesn't bring us peace because peace is not outside of us. What the universe does is it activates what it would take to evoke peace within us. And it then begins to engage us in the exercise of consciousness, like the breathing of the lungs, right? So we have to then begin to take the things that are coming into our experience into our awareness. And then it becomes like working out, like exercise. You develop muscles because there's a resistance that's there, and you push through the resistance, whether it's a weight, whether it's a resistant band, whether you're doing a push-up and pressing against the earth, or maybe even a wall. And when you do that, then you start expanding in your muscle of consciousness what it requires for you to be disrupted and out of your peace. And so as you begin to expand and grow, because you, instead of wrestling with the thoughts that come, you become aware of the thoughts that come to disturb you. And you become aware that you're not your thoughts. And then you suddenly become aware that you're no longer disturbed by the thoughts that you're experiencing. And since you're not disturbed by the thoughts that you're experiencing, you're remembering that you are peace. And it really is about remembering the truth of who we are.
I'm going to try to remember everything that I thought while you were talking. Number one is, if I ask for patience, I get something to be patient, that I have to be patient for. In essence.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It makes me practice. That's the only thing I can remember right now.
Okay, so that's okay. So let's build it up. So Brother Ishmael Tete from Ghana, who's been affiliated with Agape for, I want to say, 20-something years at this point. He constantly tells us to return to nature, to return to the things around us. Humanity, despite what many religious teachers might say, first experienced God through nature. And you start to see that humanity sees the multiplication and the infinite and plenitude and abundance and more than enough in nature. You start seeing how nature replicates itself. And so as we turn to nature, we can start to see these patterns. We don't often talk about these things. And so if we were just to learn that one of the reasons why babies are crying in those early stages, aside from the idea that that they don't have language, but they're not comfortable. They were in this sweet amniotic fluid in the mother's wombs, There was no resistance to them. Suddenly they have to deal with gravity, Jeff. And they're developing muscles. They're slowly developing strength, but they're fighting to develop it. They're like trying to figure out how to move their arms. And that's uncomfortable. Discomfort is a part of what it takes for us to evolve. And so if we will see that child learning and then stumbling and then falling, God bless the parents that won't let their children fall and stumble. It's a part of their development. Literally, the physiological development of a child requires them to fall. They have to learn how to take a licking and keep on taking. Like we're designed for this. And yet there's some parents in their journey. I'm not saying you should just let your child fall and hit their head every time, but there's just a part of it that is essential. If we take from that and we recognize that babies are evolving into toddlers, or babies are evolving into infants, and infants into toddlers, and toddlers into children, if we see that and we see that evolutionary pattern, we can see the pattern in anything else we want to do. That there's going to be some discomfort, there's going to be some learning pattern, there's going to be some pushing away and creating of developing new things, new faculties, new awareness, in order for us to expand, in order for us to evolve. And if we will do that, then we will find that it begins to grow within us. Babies can't really articulate that, but we have enough science that we can explain by the way the baby's brain is lighting up that there is pain, that there is discomfort, that there is frustration. But there's just not enough memory in there yet for them to be able to articulate that experience, but we see it.
So as we're sitting and we're becoming aware, and we're developing this, and we're now present with our emotions, and we're determining how we feel. You said something a little while ago, because this happens to me occasionally, where I will feel something, but it doesn't feel like it's me. And how do you know, and this might be a little off the topic, heading down another little aspect of what we're talking about, but how do you discern what's you and what's the weight of something else? What's going on in the world?
So this is not my primary area, of course, but this is what comes up for me when you ask that question. A lot of times we can be caught up in the race consciousness. And when Reverend Michael teaches about race consciousness, we're not talking about the ethnic designation of race. We're talking about the entirety of the human race. And from that idea, there is a consciousness about this experience of being human, and that there are waves of thoughts that are flowing, and there is group think. When you get groups of people together and there's different ideas and concepts, and you can see how it can be sort of like a contagion on how views and ideas. Hate is definitely one of those things that seems to be so contagious. Love is absolutely one of those things that is so contagious. And so when we begin to look at how the human mind works and expand it and explore it, one of the things we find is that our senses don't end at our body, right? Mm-hmm. We know that we can hear things that are far away. You know, we can smell things that are not in our immediate vicinity. And so there's also an aspect of us that is feeling our emotions. And emotions are not things that are merely what we see on our face. Emotions are things in resonance and frequencies that are in the body. And because they're frequencies and energies that are in the body, we can feel that broadcast from other people. Now, how do I know whether it's mine or somebody else's? It has everything to do with knowing the self and being able to consciously and inwardly dive and to do your own little self-check. So that's just like the idea of meditation or any of these practices. This is all developed skill set, and that is a natural part of who we are, but it does not grow naturally. It grows because we give it attention. It grows because we nurture it and we practice it. And so if I go into a room for, say, a practice and I start feeling something, the first thing that I'm doing is starting to become aware that I have a feeling, right? So even before I pass judgment or on my own feeling, I'm feeling angry, I'm sensing sadness, I'm sensing some sort of upset. The first thing I got to do is check on me. What's going on with me? Okay, I'm feeling this. Okay. I'm, where in my body am I feeling this? Can I locate it anywhere in my body? Is it in my abdomen? Is it in my arm? Am I noticing it in my back? So I can do a scan of my body. I have to have an awareness of my own body in order to be able to scan it, right, Jeff? Like I can't just scan my body just because I say, oh, I'm gonna scan my body. What does it mean to scan the body? To scan the body, it means to take the opportunity to feel throughout your body, to feel your muscles, to feel your thighs, to feel your buttocks, to feel your abdomen, to feel your scalp, just to feel, to get the sense and to see if your body has shifted in any way. Do you notice any tension? Do you notice any warmth? Do you notice any cold? Do you notice anything in your body? More times than not, when it's not ours, we don't notice any sort of reaction within us. But maybe it is ours and we haven't noticed. Maybe it's something that's happening unconscious. Then we have to begin to probe our environment. And in probing our environment, we look around, but we're not looking with the eyes. We're using our eyes to see the room physically, but we're feeling each other. In some of the practitioner studies classes over the years, some of our teachers will have some really fun experiments, and Reverend Dr. Maisha Hazard, who recently made her transition just about 2 weeks ago, is one of those teachers. Reverend Coco Stewart is one of those teachers. And what we'll do is, instead of being focused on the books and the technology, we'll have openings in our class where we just feel each other. We'll have an opening in the class where we say, okay, everybody close your eyes, and without touching anybody, somebody stand up and see if you can get a sense of who stood up. Or maybe it's somebody's going to exit the room, and see if you notice the energy of who might have exited the room. There are so many amazing practices that we can do to develop our extrasensory perception. We haven't developed it, doesn't mean that it's not currently active. I remember listening to an old episode of the Oprah Winfrey Super Soul Sunday, and they were recapping some highlights from old episodes, and they had this man, I can't remember the author, but he wrote a book that talked about how we often ignore our gut feelings. And because we ignore our gut feelings, often in situations that we found ourselves in that were hazardous, we ignored a warning because we didn't know how to interpret it. And it's not because the warning wasn't clear. We don't trust that part of ourselves. And so we said, everything's fine. Nothing's worried about. And we walk down the alley and we get our butt kicked. Or we get assaulted, or something very tragic happened. And so the author and the man who he teaches self-defense, he teaches all of this stuff about telling women and men to pay attention to your first mind, to pay attention to your first thought. Then revisited some rape, sexual assault situations with the people who survived those situations. And in every single case that they presented, there was a memory that they had that something wasn't right, that they had a feeling, and they ignored it. And that's the same sort of thing. all of these feelings and stuff, especially when we don't know clearly why we're feeling a particular way, is an opportunity not to just give in to the feeling like, I feel this way. No, it's okay. I'm becoming more conscious right now because there's a feeling that's rising up and I need to give my attention to it. If I give my attention to this feeling, and then I can begin to interpret it, I can see whether this is mine. I can see whether what information is here for me. Okay, now I'm actively engaging my awareness in sensing what is here for me. And so I say that really fast because it's about let me harness my awareness, right? Like even sitting in the chair right now, I'm aware that my butt's on the chair. I'm aware that my feet are on the floor. I'm aware that my hair is touching my forearms when I bring my arms together. Now I want to bring all of me that is aware of all four of those things into an awareness of investigating the feeling that I'm sensing. And not to judge it, but to see what it is and make an inquiry.
So to take this back to where we started, what I'm getting is what meditation does and allows me to do is to develop an awareness of my feelings and what they are and how to respond to them and allow myself to feel them. And one thing that came up while you were talking is it seems like most of our lives we're taught to ignore our feelings. A lot of people run from our feelings. We hide from our feelings in lots of different ways because they're uncomfortable, like the baby falling and all those things. But if we give ourselves chance to just feel them and experience them without reacting, that's something what I'm just hearing you say that we do in meditation and paying attention to them and how we feel. And the more we do that, the more we learn then what is ours, what are coming from other people, and also give ourselves a chance and space in order to respond appropriately to all of the information. And
Absolutely.
if we don't spend the time to sit and become self-aware and observant of ourselves and the feelings, then we never learn the skills to respond appropriately to things.
Absolutely. Human beings, and I'm not out of that category. I'm still growing. I'm still developing all of these things myself. But we all have so many skills and gifts that we are not trained in. We've not developed. We've not honed. You know, Ricky Byers, the former musical director at Agape International Spiritual Center, would say when choir auditions came along that everybody can sing, right? You don't have to pitch this, pitch that. You have to be willing to develop your voice. Do you have a voice? Yes. Are you willing to develop it? And so the first stage is in the choir, everybody sings a cappella in front of maybe the most supportive audience I've ever been in. My beloved Agape International Choir brothers and sisters, just sing I Release. And so you just have to sing the verse of the I Release. And then, of course, we learn how many people don't know the words. But we give them the words and they'll still look away from the paper because we just, we mess up words, all songs. And then when you get into the choir, it's about developing your ability to hear the note. As an engineer, you know this, that, aside, Pro Tools aside, right? Having people with ears, with microphones and headphones, their ability to hear their own voice can really help them, if they're not really great with pitch, to get on pitch without having to fix it in Pro Tools all the time. And so that's another just thing that people have to develop. And some people, certain things come very naturally to them, and others of us really have to work on that. And when you go back to the thing that you were initially talking about, just feelings and emotions, across the board, humanity is finally in a space with everything that's going on, where the message of how important emotions are, feelings are, may be louder or more frequent than boys don't cry, girls don't cry. Like, you be a big girl. There's no crying in baseball, like the old Tom Hanks line, right? From A League of Their Own. There's just all of this information that's affirming us and helping us to see that all of these things were really the best parts of us that we had the opportunity to develop, to grow and understand in. And as we do that, people who are struggling with anxiety, struggling with depression, struggling with suicidal ideation can, if they're given the opportunity, in many cases, they can find ways to navigate the fog in their mind as they awaken their own consciousness, right? And so our powerful mental health practitioners who are super loaded down right now are given a great opportunity to affirm people on a regular basis. Yes, it's important that you know that you feel that way, and you're not just your feelings. You have feelings, but you're not them.
At this point in time, with all of the emotions and things coming up that people are wrestling with, and they've never had to wrestle with them in their lives, and it's new and it's uncomfortable and they don't know what to do, it makes me really aware of how we have not taught ourselves, or there's nowhere that we don't give ourselves the right teaching of skill sets to cope with the world. We make ourselves learn math, we make ourselves learn science, but where do we learn how to deal with things on an emotional level, and that it's okay to be emotional and to have those feelings? And as you were saying, that is really coming up right now, and it's uncomfortable as people are having to all of a sudden be aware of all of these things that are welling up inside of them and not knowing how to respond to it.
Absolutely. And we have children being raised by parents who were raised by parents who were from a harsh world, a harsh environment, growing up in the 60s, growing up in the 20s, growing up in the early 20th century was a painful existence for many people. And they were raising their children way before any Dr. Spock's book was out, raising their children before a lot of child psychology had really been unearthed. And now we live in an era where we can really see that there are some people who are ill-equipped when they have their child for raising a child. But those people now have access, in many cases, at the least to the internet. At the least to the internet. YouTube video after Vimeo video after workshop and IG Live with people who have taught and trained and worked with clients for decades to share the wisdom. Once upon a time, indigenous people didn't push away the elders, and the elders were constantly dispensing wisdom. Constantly dispensing wisdom. But as we lost those connections of communities where wisdom was a priority, and wisdom can only be gained from a lived life, right? Wisdom doesn't come from a college degree. It doesn't come from a certification. It doesn't come from wealth. Wisdom comes from lived experience or a divine insight. Right? So you went to the elders, or you went to the shaman, or you went to the teachers, you went to the gurus in the communities, and they held the knowledge and they held the wisdom. And sending us back to those people, like we have the wonderful family, Wachan and his family that come to Agape on a regular basis. But there are just so many Shaman Durek, I think I'm getting his name right, people who are bringing into popular awareness, not just trendy, but it's becoming more popular, just like meditation and yoga and all of these things has become more popular, setting aside how they've been corporatized and how they've been turned into capital, being focused around capitalism. But still, the popularity of the things have allowed people to have access to it. And of course, when you're approaching it from an open heart, you can tap into something like yoga beyond anything that your 800 hours of training yoga teacher at all the fancy establishments could ever give you. In the same room while they're taking you through the asanas, you can have a transitory experience that they're not available to because they're focused on money and you're focused on being available, but you've now been tapped into a practice and it's life-changing.
You know, something that I've started thinking while you were talking about the wisdom of the elders and the passing along of that information and being able to see it on YouTube and watch all those channels and read all the books. We have access to it. But you know where I have gained the most is when I've been sitting in person next to somebody who extended a loving heart to me by just letting me be me and opening up and just being there. And it has always been the elder person or the person that has been have a life lived of wisdom and experiences that have embraced me in those moments. And I got this vision while you were talking about the elders, and I saw a teepee with like the old chief sitting in there and the young couple coming in and sitting and asking them for wisdom. And it's just the presence, the physical presence sometimes where we get that. And I think sometimes that we don't get enough of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the structure, it starts with the structure of our society. So even setting aside the teepee, right? But just, there are so many families that that don't have the grandparent in the home.
Yeah.
Now, that's really an interesting idea in 2020 because some of the grandparents want to live independently. They don't want that. But even still, I know, and my brother and I, my father passed 6 years ago. And over these past 6 years, especially the before he made his transition, my brother and I marveled at who my father became when he became a grandfather. So my sister, my bonus sister, through marriage, birthed his first grandchild, I think, when I was probably 22. And slowly and then quickly, my brother and I noticed that father changed when he became a grandfather, and then he became a grandfather multiple times over. And it wasn't just towards the grandchildren, though it was towards them. Even how he reacted to us, there is another thing that can often be activated in families when they see the other generations of their existence expressed before them. They've lived with their children for 20 some odd years or whatever, and then they see now another extended version that still exists here on the earth plane, and now that my father is on the other side. There's something that happens, and I'm sure there are authors that have written about this phenomenon, and I know my friends and I, we look at like, who is this guy? Who, like, I don't even know you. All the humor and the generosity and the kindness, but a lot of that's because I'm aware that a lot of it's because the fears that they held on to for so long never manifest. And a lot of parents are raising their children out of fear, out of worry, out of anxiety. Many of parents are raising their children out of the trauma that they endured. There's this pastor named John Gray who was not raised with his father, but he learned about who his father was. He says you will learn about your parents when you get to know who raised them. And when you start looking at your grandparents from a different perspective, not just of how they are towards you as a grandparent, but how they were as a parent, you can see some of the challenges they had as they were parents, and especially if they'll share those things with you, because many people can acknowledge that I wasn't a really good parent with my first child, or I was really struggling, or, you know, when you're in your early 20s and you have children and your finances aren't, the stresses that are there, the world is this, that, and the other. And then as people get older, more lived experience, the 20s, and they're in their 30s, and then it's a transformation that takes place that's very visible. And that's something that really makes a powerful impact on people's lives when they recognize that in an elder.
Well, you know, I try to be an elder to my kids, and they just go, "Nah, Dad, nah." Yeah,
You can't be an elder to your kids.
yeah.
You can develop that kind of relationship, but you're not the elder for your
No.
children. You're going to be the elder for your grandchildren. You're going to be your child's nemesis in their imagined life, because they think you don't want them to do what they want to do all the time, and da, 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 which we know is not true, but it's a different relationship dynamic.
Yeah, you know, one thing I wanted to just touch on before we wrap it up. We're almost out of time. So my daughter is having issues with friends, and she's, now that they're all distant and they're not together, and she doesn't have a lot of close friends, and she's concerned about what her friends are going to be like, or will she have friends? You know, I mean, how is it going to go? And you know, as a parent, I want to be there for her, and I don't want her to have to uh, go through troubles, but I can only sit there and listen to what she had to say. And she said something really interesting. She said, "You know, Dad, I just have to actually just sit through this myself, and I'll be okay once I sit through these feelings." And I thought, for a 14-year-old, that was pretty wild.
Ah, yeah, man.
I'm like,
We raise our children and our children raise us.
right? I'm like, why can't I think like that? You know, I just got to sit and work through. I just got to let this work through me, Dad. I'll be okay.
Absolutely. Well, she's in a world now that says that's okay.
Yeah.
You and I were not raised necessarily in a world that said it was okay for a child to be angry or irritated or frustrated. You know, it appears really clearly that you're affirming her as a child and her feelings and her existence, even when you disagree, even when you may have to discipline her. But here's the biggest thing. Affirming a child and her inner voice, her feelings, her thoughts, is such an important role for a parent. Because if a parent disregards how a child feels, they're going to struggle for a long time, potentially, because now they don't trust their own self.
Right.
The first person to teach a child not to trust themselves is often a parent who disregards a child's feelings, disregards a child's mood. And I'm not saying that we don't have to work on things with children. For example, a parent, like you said earlier, you don't want to have troubles. And I want to say something for you to take to your daughter too. You don't want your child to have troubles, but that's how we grow. You know, we forget that that's part of the journey.
Yeah.
And the skills that you develop by going through the troubles that you did, if you don't allow your daughter to go through the troubles that are in front of her, then she doesn't get to develop the skills that she needs.
All right.
And so here's the other thing for you to take as a parent is your child has an idea of who she is. She has an idea of where she is in connection to social circumstance. But I really want you to let your daughter know that that as important as friends are at this stage in her life, most human beings are not still friends with the friends that they had in elementary and middle school. Most people aren't. And it's not because of anything that was wrong with them. The priority is not developing friendships. It's learning how to be a good human.
Mm.
And if you're surrounding yourself with friends who are not good human, so you become a not good human so that you can have friends, you're missing what you can be developing, so that then by the time you become an adult and you start connecting with people at a different level, I know it's not the nicest, the most friendliest, best answer for a child, because we want to feel connected. That's why we figure out other things and other ways for children to connect. Sometimes that's in sports. Sometimes that's in other activities. Sometimes that's in the arts. Some of my closest friendships weren't from the classrooms and the playground, but they were from music class, or they were from my Little League team. And even still, none of those friendships lasted for me. But my greatest friendships that I developed happened in college and happened, after I turned 30. And they're friendships now that I couldn't live without. And I know people from my childhood, but those are not the friends that are in my life now. And then I know some people that do. It's not the case for everybody.
To bring this full circle to everything that we talked about with meditation and everything, it occurs to me that what you just said about it, our purpose is to become a good human being. And if I can be a conduit, a way, allow my child to learn that and on her own and experience that and help cultivate that in her.
Mm-hmm.
I have to be there myself first.
Mm-hmm.
But if we all can get to that place now, we could get through what's going on right now in a better way.
Absolutely. And that's the goal for every generation. Every generation goes through the same skeletal process, right? The skeleton of the evolution of humanity through generation and generation is the same. You've got people, you've got systems, you've got structures, right? You've got different things, and they're moving through whatever is happening in the world. And our goal through this journey is to evolve. Is the world a better place over the course of our journey because of how we've impacted other people and how we've impacted the world? In some respects, the generations that are alive right now are addressing things from previous generations that were supposed to have been addressed according to the civil rights movement, according to the EPA and different organizations in America where we're conserving and taking. Think about somebody as old as John Muir, which was the high school that I was, my high school was named after, who was walking around the country trying to get people to conserve nature. And people still haven't figured out how essential that is. And so, but now we're doing better. We're doing better than we were doing during the Industrial Revolution. We're doing it because that just, but we're doing better.
Well, right now we're at a place where there's an opportunity for us to grab onto something new.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still not, I have no idea how it's all going to turn out.
Oh, nobody does. Everybody thinks they do. Some people think they do, Jeff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have my own ideas, but they, anyway. Well, Jason, again, we just touched the tip of the iceberg on this thing again.
Yeah, man.
And I appreciate you being here, and I hope that I asked the right questions to get where I was trying to get.
Well, you'll evaluate it from your perspective, but the metaphysical perspective will be, you could not have asked questions that were not meant to be asked, and any question that wasn't asked was not meant to be asked. What is, what isn't. That's what it is.
And yeah, I mean, that's just the whole idea is just have a conversation about the stuff.
There we go. I mean, and I think that more than anything, that's what we don't do enough of.
Right.
And it's why something like a talk show on television becomes so popular, because just seeing people in dialogue, listening people, and just thank you for everybody that showed up and dropped comments. My dear friend Elizabeth and
Yeah.
Ada and some others that are in the chat, David, just, the ability to be engaged in dialogue is essential. And again, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. It's not even about agreement. Like this is a different kind of platform, but just being able to dialogue
Yeah.
with people is huge. And I'm glad that we're able to do it.
Yeah, me too. And we'll keep it going. And thank you again, Jason. I'm deeply grateful for you doing this with me.
It's my honor and joy, Jeff.
Yes, and I too like watching all the people that have been tuning in. So that means that people are paying attention, and that's a good thing.
Absolutely. And they're available. Again, this is what Reverend Michael taught about a lot last month, the Corona bonus.
Oh.
There's been a lot of gifts in all of this that we could not have requested. We never would have imagined they'd happen if we had requested them.
I just last thing, I would, had the coronavirus not happened, I would definitely not be sitting here with you talking, because
there it is.
I mean, and this is doing more good for me than any gig.
Hey, well, I'm glad we're doing it.
All right, Jason. Thank you for being here. Have a great rest of the day. Okay.
Absolutely. You too, Jeff.
Okay. Afternoon.